So as you can probably tell, I've been getting into late 90s computers recently, so this is a good time I guess to make a video about my Pentium 3. I've had this computer laying around for a good long while now, but just recently I've been giving it some upgrades to make it actually kind of noteworthy. Originally this case housed a Celeron CPU on a slocket. I had to buy a sticker from eBay for like $3 to put on here to make it actually kind of authentic. On the back, everything looks pretty generic, all your regular I/O stuff, except for there's one thing there, a black card. One of the nicest things about this case is that it has latches on the side that make it easy to remove the side panels, or at least somewhat easy, as I struggle to get this side panel off. That strange sound card with the black bracket on it is actually a Diamond Monster MX300, which is an Aureal Vortex A3D2 whatever sound card. Also, for whatever reason, I had this Dream Blaster S2 in there, which I don't use in this computer. I found this at a thrift store for about $3. It's alright, it's not a big fan of it. Also, I should probably get this out of there. Right above it is a Voodoo 3 3000 PCI, which I bought for $8 at a thrift store. Actually, Goodwill of all places. This game supposedly came with Unreal and Need for Speed 3. I got neither, but I already have both games, so whatever. Also, all the screenshots look horribly washed out. I don't know if I'd want to buy based on those screenshots. Even though it's a PCI card, it still kicks all sorts of ass on this Pentium 3. Just kind of shows that you didn't really need AGP at the time, I suppose. The CPU that drives all this is a Pentium 3 933 MHz. The CPU is supposed to be used with a 133 MHz bus speed, but this board only supports 100. The reason I'm using the CPU is so I could use it like a 700 MHz Pentium 3, but have it guaranteed to be able to overclock a little bit. That way I can have a faster Pentium 3 on a 100 MHz bus without having to spend a bunch of money. It also has 512 MB of RAM, most of which I probably won't use for this computer. So the first thing you see when you start the computer up is your Voodoo 3 splash screen, and let's go into the BIOS real quick and take a look at my pathetic little overclock. So of course on these CPUs you can't change the multiplier, so I had to turn up the bus speed a little bit to 112, and that gives me a whopping 784 MHz. That almost gives me an 800 MHz CPU for kind of cheap. And of course, this is the computer that I installed Windows ME on, and no, I actually haven't had any problems running it so far. I guess time will really tell how unstable this thing is. I suppose that Unreal was the Crysis of its time in a way, and yeah, it can run Crysis from 1990 whatever. This is running an 800 by 600 with Glide enabled. I know I could probably run it at a slightly higher resolution, but I prefer to keep my frame rates rather smooth. Of course, the box on this card said it could do 3D gaming at 60 frames per second, so that's what I'm going to do. Of course, since the original Voodoo could kill this game, we already know that the Voodoo 3 and the Pentium 3 are going to absolutely demolish it. But since this game has its MMX mode, that makes me kind of curious considering that the Pentium 2 450 MHz couldn't quite handle it at 640 by 480. So what happens if I run it on a Pentium 3 at nearly 800 MHz? So as you can probably tell already, it's already brought the Pentium 3 to its knees, which is kind of weird. I don't really understand why they even had this mode in the first place if it doesn't even really work on something this fast. If you're going to be having an 800 MHz Pentium 3, of course you're going to have at least the most basic 3D card available, and that can run Frogger better than this. I thought it was a little bit odd, so I went and messed with it a little bit and turned it down to 300 by 400 resolution on MX, and it actually runs really smooth. So I'm wondering if it's just not designed for 640 by 480. And if it really has that many problems with 640 by 480, I wonder why they even allow you to select that option in the menu. Kind of confuses me. Rollercoaster Tycoon is also one of my favorite games to play on this computer. It just runs pretty dang smooth at 800 by 600. But anyway, when you get into very populated areas here, you can see that it gets a little bit of slowdown while scrolling and just everything kind of slows down a little bit. But it's not too bad to make it unplayable at 800 by 600. If it really becomes a problem, you can just turn the resolution down. However, on Rollercoaster Tycoon 2 here, right after failing this mission, I kicked everybody out of my park, so we have basically 60 guests, and it's actually lagging kind of hard when just scrolling around the park. If you throw in a bunch of guests and make a smaller park, it even starts to become more apparent a little bit. Now take a look at those swirling water tornadoes. See how slow they're going right there? Yeah, they're going kind of slow. So if we go over here real quick where there's not much going on and make a couple, or just one, you can see that the difference in speed is quite actually different. So even though the scrolling isn't too terribly bad, you can tell that the time is kind of slowed down in these more busy spots. Makes it kind of harder to see how fast coasters and stuff are going just by looking at them. So I'd actually probably recommend a faster PC to run this game. So if I were to pick a computer to run Battlezone on, it would probably be this one. However, for whatever reason still, if you turn around and see your own dirt getting kicked up by going backwards, it lags your game out a little bit, but not nearly as bad as the older cards. Also right here, while trying to demonstrate the dirt lag, I was attacked without even realizing it. Shows you how much I pay attention. Gotta love some friendly fire. This is also a pretty good era of computer to be playing Sims on, or I almost said Sims 2, but it's Sims 1. And don't mind my horribly designed house, my big piles of dishes, and multiple breakfasts sitting around. I'm trying to start a fire here. You know, I probably couldn't think of a better time to fall asleep than now. Here's another game that I used to play a lot as a kid but never really got very far into, and this computer can obviously run it very well at 800 by 600 with 3D card mode enabled. It doesn't really look like a too demanding game, but for whatever reason my Pentium 200 MMX won't run it very well with its Voodoo card. In order to get it to run decently on that computer, you always have to turn down the draw distance. You also gotta love bad camera controls on these older platformers like this. That was just bullshit. Also, this game has two different software rendering modes. First is without a 3D card for slow computers, which is basically what you would expect out of software rendering on pretty much any game. The other mode is kind of cool though, because it kind of tries to emulate the shading of a 3D card using software rendering. And obviously the Pentium 3 alone at 800 MHz isn't as good as the Voodoo 3, because the Voodoo 3 destroys all. So this is the original Half-Life. I'm not too big of a fan of this game, as you can probably tell just by watching this. I have no fucking clue what I'm doing. However, it's a game that can demonstrate the Diamond Monster Multimedia MX300. Yay. So right here we have the Sludge Waterfall, with which we can test our 3D audio. I don't know about you, but for some reason I think I like it better with the 3D audio off. It just sounds more clear, less muffled. This probably isn't the best game to convince me that the 3D audio is any good anyway, since I never really liked the audio coming out of this game in the first place.
Offensive unit lost. Warning.
Getting into early 3D games is kind of a mess, as you can probably tell from my last few videos, just all the weird graphics cards that don't really do that much. If you were to get into early 3D games, I'd probably suggest a computer like this, although maybe not a Voodoo 3, because those tend to go for a little bit more money than what I would be willing to pay on eBay. Just any older AGP card would really do the trick that isn't the Trident. Heck, a TNT2 M64 wouldn't be too bad of a GPU for some of the older games. It's pretty cheap and it's readily available literally everywhere. Also, unless you're trying to get the very high-end Pentium 3s, Pentium 3s are pretty cheap. They're still throwaway computers, so if you want to get into games of this era, it's actually pretty cheap, as long as you're not expecting to get some high-end fancy enthusiast cards that all the collectors are wanting. If you want something that works, it's actually not too bad.